Hello and welcome to today's video topic about DEI. I may be laughing right now, but trust me, there's nothing funny that we're talking about today. Hey guys, what's up? It's Imurgency and welcome back to my channel. Today, like whatever that was alluding to, we're talking about the DEI conversation, the DEI debate, if you will. And I know it's pretty broad, but we're more so going to be talking about the implications of the rolling back of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, in relation to Gen Z, of course, but also in pop culture and media, with one recent example being the Grammys, with people's reactions to the Grammys winners, namely Beyonce, which was actually kind of concerning. And then we're also going to just talk about how the whole concept of DEI has sort of just been commodified into essentially just like a slur against people of color, specifically Black people, honestly, and hopefully give some clarifications for people who don't really understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion really entails and who follows under that. Because again, I think oftentimes when it's been used in media recently, it's essentially code for Black people. One, no, and two, the initiative impacts so many other groups of people, almost more so than it does for Black people. And we're gonna talk about all that. So yeah, if that sounds interesting to you and you are new to the channel, then definitely don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, follow me on my social media on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, and stay tuned for the show because we have a lot to talk about. I'm gonna try and not make this super duper political and more so like a culture commentary, but I think because of the way that things have been going, we do have to start with some of the politics around what's been happening. So if you have not been caught up in recent news, the country's president has made it a mission to roll back DEI initiatives, attack DEI initiatives, and bring back what the administration likes to call merit-based opportunity. And in a recent executive order, the president stated that long-standing federal civil rights laws protected individual Americans from discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And the civil rights have been a bedrock supporting equality of opportunity for all Americans. And as president, his solemn duty to ensure that these laws are enforced for the benefit of all Americans. Yet, today, roughly 60 years after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, critical and influential institutions of American society, and he goes on to list those institutions, have adopted and actively used dangerous, demeaning, and immoral race and sex-based preferences under the guise of so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion, or diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which can violate the civil rights laws of this nation. Which is a very interesting take and can lead one to believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion is actually doing the opposite of being diverse, equitable, and including people. And just so we're clear, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is a landmark law that prohibits discrimination in the United States based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. And it applies to both state and federal governments. And essentially what the president is saying here is that DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, are immoral and discriminatory and go against the tenets of the Civil Rights Act. And the argument here is essentially that DEI initiatives are giving marginalized people an unfair leg up in opportunities, that people see them as being not qualified for or not as qualified or are only qualified because of their identity. And I think that by taking that as a means of discrimination, it's a big misconception of what DEI actually is. And that misconception is a major talking point now for why these initiatives have been and need to be rolled back. And we've seen it take place already in the workforce. That executive order was just for the government, but many different corporations have been following suit with the quickness, which honestly, I'm shocked about. Well, am I? I just thought that they let it simmer for a little bit. No, the second that executive order went through, businesses were quick to snatch back the 2020 DEI initiatives, being we hear you, we see you, to being bitch, who? You have companies like Target rolling back DEI initiatives, Meta platforms, Amazon, McDonald's, Walmart even, and many, many more. And the thing about it is that it's really a choice that companies make. And it really shows companies' values because these companies did not adopt these initiatives, these diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, unless they would have seen the benefit of it. And the benefits for when these initiatives were initially adopted for some companies was clearly just for social clout and to seem like they were doing good as a company, as opposed to actually seeing the value in it and prioritizing what diversity, equity, and inclusion means, both for our workforce and also for the people and customers that they serve. And you really see which side of values these companies really prioritize based on the ones that have decided to roll back initiatives so quickly to ones that have continued to dedicate themselves and rededicate themselves to their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, like companies like Costco, where 98% of the shareholders at Costco voted to not end DEI initiatives and to remain committed to those efforts. You have corporations like JP Chase, like Chase Bank, Apple, who's had a long-term history of prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion in their workforce and also in the products that they create. They have a strong commitment to accessibility and have stated that they have a firm commitment to serving as many customers as possible from a plethora of different backgrounds. You have companies like Pinterest, Microsoft, Delta Airlines, and Salesforce all remaining steadfast in their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think I keep saying DEI and diversity, equity, and inclusion a lot, but we never really talked about like what that actually means. And I also think that it is one of the main issues, is that no one really knows what it means or what exactly it entails. And that kind of leads to what we're going to talk about a little bit later with how the term has sort of been weaponized and is almost now akin to like a slur. I know I made a whole video talking about how Gen Z is slurring again. DEI in its modern form now might be one of those. So what exactly is DEI? DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a framework for organizations to promote fairness and equal participation for all people. In fact, DEI aims to create welcoming environments where people feel respected and valued.
A lot of y'all don't know what DEI really is, and I'm about to educate you real quick. DEI is not hiring people because they're black. It's making sure they don't get discriminated against because they're black. And I be seeing a lot of those supporters on here talking about oh, thank God, they're taking these jobs, You weren't even qualified for the job in the first place. Let's start there. Like, I'm sick of this narrative that DEI just makes black people get into jobs, because that's not what it is. It prevents us from being discriminated against because we're black. Like, I'm not understanding what the confusion is here, but to those people who think that DEI is just hiring people because they're black, you're just loud and wrong. And I hope someday you come to terms with what your president did, because that's not my president. That's your president. But yeah, anyways, it's only day 8, y'all, out of like 1,000 something. So we're definitely in for a ride. So yeah, buckle up.
DEI and DEI initiatives aren't put in place just to put marginalized people in places that they don't belong. It was created to give those communities a fair shot at being considered for the opportunities that they are already qualified for. Because previously the issue was you'd have 2 people applying for a job, a white person and a black person. They're both equally qualified candidates, or even in cases where the black candidate would be more qualified and would have more experience, more education, or even more of an it factor to be considered for a job, the employer would still go out and choose the white person. And sure, that's just an example, but there have been studies for like this happened and has happened a lot, to the point where they needed to implement these diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives to even out the playing field. So when we have these conversations about merit-based positions, it doesn't really make sense, because oftentimes the way that the country is set up anyway, people of color, and especially black people in these positions where they have to be qualified, oftentimes are overqualified for positions. Especially black women have to do 2 or sometimes even 3 times the work to get half the recognition and to have a seat at the table. So these initiatives are bringing people up so they're on the same level. It's not that people are just getting jobs because they're black, or getting jobs because they have a certain sexual orientation or a certain set of beliefs. It's just that historically, and honestly, ironically, a certain group of people would get jobs just because of their identity and not necessarily because of their qualifications. So let's break down what exactly the components of DEI mean. So diversity. Diversity essentially means gender, age, religion, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, disability, and even veteranship. Equity, sort of what I was talking about before, evening the playing field. Equity refers to concepts of fairness and justice, such as fair compensation and substantive equality, with equity usually including a focus on societal disparities and allocating resources and decision-making authority to groups that have been historically disadvantaged. And inclusion referring to creating organizational cultures that creates an experience where everyone involved, all employees, feel that their voices will be heard and are valued, and creating a sense of belonging and integration. Now, those are like the actual definitions. The societal and social definition that has sort of been co-opted nowadays has sort of been transformed into something akin to a slur, or more of a gotcha, like now just meaning any system or program or an event feeling that just like helps black people and other people of color to advance in society where people don't necessarily feel that they deserved it. And this is where things have started to get really spooky, because now there are jokes online of where like you'll see a black person or a person of color achieve something or get a position or make some sort of announcement, and people are quick to flock to the comments, especially on Twitter, to say things like DEI or like this DEI hire or anything to the sort, essentially devaluing and delegitimizing the accomplishment, the status, or the importance of the person that is being called a DEI hire or DEI. And we're gonna get into it, but we've seen that especially recently with the Grammys. But before we talk about that, let's clear some stuff up, because I've been talking a lot about DEI and Black people when that's not really directly who DEI actually impacts, or the totality of what DEI initiatives really impact. I think one of the big problems here is that when people think of like the opposite of DEI, they often think of just like whiteness in general being the default. When in reality, in America, the default is cisgendered, white, straight, able-bodied men who are that default. And again, this is not me sending any hate. I'm not saying that being a straight white man is bad, or trying to demonize or put disproportionate fault on these people, because that's kind of how we got here. I'm just saying the fact that regardless of that demographics individual control, they are systemically the group that founded this country. That demographic of people was who the country was initially built for. Of course, times have changed. So if you do not fall into that category, technically, diversity, equity, and inclusion applies to you. And I think that that's where a disconnect is, because again, people think DEI and they think Black people. No, anyone who is not a part of that very specific group of straight, white, able-bodied men fits under diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that includes white women and even veterans. And the rolling back of these programs will directly impact these people too, and we've seen it already.
DEI actually affects every single one of our lives. Almost every single person in the workplace benefits from DEI in some capacity, in some way. So removing these programs, not funding them, not pushing them forward, and not ensuring that we are having a concerted focus on making sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion exists in our corporate world is just narrowing our pool of talent. It's narrowing our abilities to do our jobs and run our businesses appropriately. And it doesn't align with the world we need to exist in nowadays.
In fact, statistically, white women have benefited the most from DEI initiatives. According to a McKinsey study, white women hold nearly 19% of all C-suite positions, while racial and ethnic minority hold only 4%. Overall, white women have benefited disproportionately from corporate DEI efforts. And I think when we talk about this conversation, it's important to remember that giving resources to underrepresented groups does not tangibly take anything away from the dominant majority. Now let's talk about how the rolling back of these initiatives are going to impact Gen Z media landscape, and how we're going to and have already seen changes in society because of it. Let's start with in-store initiatives, right? For stores, DEI initiatives are how you prevent or reduce the likelihood of products, launches, and marketing that can come across as insensitive or just flat out racist. Like, I think we all remember that one H&M ad, the Kendall Jenner Pepsi commercial. Like, having more voices from diverse backgrounds in the room help, one, prevent problematic stuff like that give businesses a bad rap, and allow for more targeted and specific messaging to diverse groups so that you can turn more of a profit because you're accessing a market that previously you were not really tapping into very well. According to a built-in article, from a business standpoint, different perspectives directly influence a product. Who it serves, how it functions, and so on, Coleman said. More perspectives make for a better product. People from different backgrounds with varying life experiences will be able to provide new perspectives that help refine and enhance processes. So truly a net positive here when these initiatives are done right. And without them, we're going to see some very quick rollback. Like, you already know Target is cutting back on the Pride stuff, on the Black History Month stuff, essentially losing out on those communities that previously felt safe and represented by brands like Target. And people may say, like, why do you need to be represented in places? And I don't know if you're new to the channel, but like, we talk about representation a lot over here because representation truly is everything. Especially growing up, and even as adults, we don't like to admit this, but adults as well. Seeing yourself or seeing someone that looks like you in places that you never thought you'd be able to go, dreams that you never thought you were allowed to have, is honestly life-changing and expanding the bounds for what is possible for underrepresented people. And that matters. You're never gonna think of becoming a doctor yourself. It's very real for people to not see themselves in high-earning professions or high-status professions because they haven't seen people that look like them in those positions. It becomes a sort of thing where, like, oh, people like me don't do this sort of thing, which is why representation and visibility like this is so important. And we're really going to and have already started seeing these changes. Like, specifically for Gen Z, this might be a rougher time because, again, Gen Z is already struggling to find jobs with the current employment market. Gen Z is also one of the most diverse generations, statistically, as well as our generation being one of the most educated generations in recent times, with a lot of those people that do have a higher level of education being women. So if they're rolling back these DEI initiatives and things go back to how they used to be, where it was more acceptable to be discriminatory and hiring processes, and also when you're actually in those jobs, who do you think that's really going to impact? And it's not just young people in Gen Z either, because diversity, equity, and inclusion also includes age. So older people as well, because ageism is certainly a thing. And if your hiring manager just thinks you're too old to be working or too old to be in a position, they might just give it to a younger person, and that would be more okay. Like, I can already see people being like, oh, the Civil Rights Act already protects from that, so like you're overreacting for nothing. If it truly did do all of that and was enforced properly from the get-go, there would never have needed to be diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in the first place. That wasn't just a fabrication. It came to be because things clearly were not working. But I digress. We're also seeing the rollback of DEI affect pop culture, with certain tropes that are likely to be recycled because of the lack of the already very slim diversity in writers' rooms. With people with limited experiences and interactions, tasked with making these complex and in-depth cultural characters who have life experiences that are vastly different from them. Like trope-wise, think of the resurgence of the angry black girl trope, the disposable black girlfriend trope, the black best friend trope, the gay best friend trope, or the lack of visibility of gay or queer characters in general. And in terms of examples of movie productions, think of what has happened with Emilia Perez, with all the things that the director of that movie has come out and said. Imagine that being more so of the norm. Again, on the conversation of movies, the rolling back of DEI culturally and legislatively also will impact representation in movies. We're likely going to be seeing a rollback of projects that have a female lead, with some previous projects with female leads flopping, like Madam Web in The Marvels, which the lack of success of these movies are only going to incentivize the decrease in their creation, when in reality it honestly had nothing to do with the leads being women, because the actors in these movies are phenomenal. They were just given a bad movie with a bad script. But of course that nuance isn't going to be interpreted. You have things like black storylines and scripts being potentially halted or canceled altogether, with the only stories that do come out around the black experience being the usual black struggle films, which we've been working so hard to move past, but you know, we might be going back. And this comes at a time when we're seeing scripts and projects be halted already, like with recent shows like How to Die Alone starring Natasha Rothwell getting canceled after just one season. Fewer and fewer movies passing the Bechdel test, the magical Negro trope reappearing. Like, we're really going back to an era of cinema where things were generally more boring and weren't as diverse or expansive, which leads to a next change that we can see and have sort of been seeing is representation in awards. And this is where I want to talk about the Grammys, because I think the Grammys and its fallout and everything to do with the Grammys this year really did show the beauty and value of valuing diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, directly contrast with the social, cultural, and political landscape that we're in right now with the anti-DEI sentiments. Like with the Grammys themselves, the Grammys this year were the best they've been in years, and that's because they really made a stance to value that diversity, equity, and inclusion. They had a whole segment where the CEO of the Recording Academy came in and talked about how they were making changes to really listen to more diverse voices, having more diverse initiatives, committing themselves to having diverse initiatives, and bringing on newer, more green, and younger people, both behind the scenes and on the screen, to help inform and make the Grammys better. And it really worked. This year, they really valued innovation and new talent.
I didn't vote for Cowboy Carter because I'm a fan. I voted for Cowboy Carter because it deserved it. I didn't vote for Doechii because I'm a fan. I voted for Doechii because it deserved it. I didn't vote for Chaperone because I'm a fan. I voted for Chaperone because it deserves it. You see how that works? Anyone that is voicing their problems with Beyonce winning Album of the Year and Country Album, Best Country Album, then you're either racist or you don't understand how music works.
Whether that be the way that they presented the show, with them having special guests, with them, yes, highlighting legacy artists and giving their flowers to legacy artists, but really having the majority of the show be based of the newer Best New Artist category, the new faces in the industry, giving them each a chance to perform and show how the music industry is changing, as well as rewarding them and awarding them wins in major categories because of the innovation they're bringing to the music industry, really showing and being an exemplar for what the music industry really is. Like for Best Rap category, you have someone like Doechii, who is an extremely experimental, very true to self and unapologetic female rapper who came out with a project that for one is really excellent, but something that most people have not really heard before when it comes to rap. Something that was truly innovative and had a vision, a dream, the visuals and whole universe behind it, beating out projects from legacy greats like Future and Metro Boomin, J. Cole and the likes, and then giving an amazing performance. Like, people were genuinely entertained with this year's Grammys because it was different, because it really showed a commitment and a value to diverse and innovative voices. When we cut out things like DEI, we lose that. Historically gotten is the same boring, old, familiar faces that do the same thing. Nothing really groundbreaking, nothing really exciting, and nothing that really pushes the needle forward. And I could talk endlessly about the Grammys because this year was just great, but that leads me to where we see that juxtaposed against the societal reality of where we are. Seeing a great show that seems to be pushing us forward is one thing, but then coming back to reality and seeing where we are with Beyonce. So Beyonce at the Grammys not only won Best Country Album, beating out all the other country artists, but then also went on to win Album of the Year, beating out the likes of Billie Eilish and Taylor Swift and Charli XCX and all that. Now, to those that have truly listened to the album, know Beyonce's story, know her quality of work and the type of music that she releases and has released for decades, her winning both of these awards is seen as well-deserved and long overdue, honestly. This is the same woman that released the biggest country album of the year, yet was not nominated at all at the Country Music Awards. The same award show that she performed at years prior, and then got basically harassed and discriminated against, which then caused her to go on the process of creating Cowboy Carter. But because she won, a lot of outrage sparked online of people calling it a DEI award, people saying that her husband bought it or that she didn't deserve it in favor of Billie Eilish or whoever else was in that category. And this conversation is where things get especially dangerous and where I think that the DEI debate gets into really dangerous territory, because if Beyonce, one of the hardest working, one of the most overqualified Black women just generally in music and pop stardom and celebrity, being truly the modern day pinnacle of celebrity. Like, she is and has been for at least a decade the celebrity's celebrity, one of the most powerful and influential women on earth, being discredited for an award that she rightfully won and deserved and put a lot of effort into because of DEI, and to have the validity of her accolades be questioned, maybe even discredited, then what do you think that means for everybody else? And that's the problem. This whole DEI thing has just been co-opted now and turned into something just to discredit people of color, or really anyone that the public deems as undeserving, even when evidence shows the complete opposite, which shows this is really never about merit. Because, like, how are you gonna tell me that one of the most hardest working people in the industry was not worthy of an award? Like, how are you gonna discredit that? Like, this whole conversation around DEI is just giving people an excuse to be exclusionary and to discredit and devalue people of color, women, people with disabilities, people with any form of marginalized adversities, achievements, because of their marginalized identity, largely because they think that their marginalized identity is the only reason that they were able to be considered. Like, no, you're discrediting all of the hard work, all of the effort, all of the years growing up in a society, in a culture where you had to prove yourself, where you had to work hard, where you had to learn the game to play the game. And the fact now that we're weaponizing DEI and outcasting companies or associations or whatever what have you that care to prioritize a diverse workforce, a diverse population, is sending a message that, like, now, unless you're from a certain demographic, your achievements are going to be questioned and scrutinized and delegitimized even more than before. And it really brings into question of, like, what do we consider good and worthy? Like, what do we consider hard work and merit? Because I think that the whole concept of merit and hard work really does harken back to, like, the traditional American dream that, like, if you work hard enough, you can get whatever you want. And that's the whole narrative around DEI, is that it's like circumventing that, in that it's rewarding people that aren't working hard and aren't qualified more than the people that are just working hard themselves. But, like, clearly it's been shown time and time again that working hard for everybody, the same level of work across the board, just working hard does not benefit everybody the same way. Because the whole concept of merit and merit alone discounts the nuanced context that having a marginalized identity provides behind that. Because if it was truly based around merit and how hard someone was working, people of color en masse would be running this country. Like, think back to it. The foundations of America were built on the labor of Black people, and there were actual laws put in place for decades that further kept Black people away from contributing to American politics, society, and culture. And the impacts of that do not just go away when the laws change. Like, Black people and people of color have always been hard workers, and this isn't to say that any other demographic isn't either, but I think it's really disingenuous to ignore the cultural context, the cultural nuance, and the cultural history behind these different groups to help explain why things are the way they are. Like, you just can't ignore the reasons of why hard work is treated and recognized differently for different groups. So I think in the context of DEI, DEI, I think it's really important to examine what exactly do we mean when we talk about qualification? What does it mean to be qualified? What does it look like, and who does it look like to be qualified, and why? Because I think answering those questions and analyzing those answers will bring us to some interesting conversations. But yeah, that's all I got for this video, y'all. I know that this was a loaded topic, but I definitely wanted to talk about it because I think that it's really important right now. And also, I did want to talk about the Grammys because that also kind of fit very well into this conversation. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think about all this? Where do you think we should go with diversity, equity, and inclusion? The Grammys, whatever, what have you. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I do implore you to be respectful in the comments. Again, if you're new to the channel and like content like this, be sure to subscribe, leave a like on this video, follow me on my socials at Imurgency on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. But other than that, y'all, I've been Imurgency, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.